Good evening, this is Resonance 104.4 FM or ResonanceFM.com. My name is Frank Key and this is Hooting Yard on the Air. If you drew a straight line between Hooting Yard and Bodger's Spinney and your pen wobbled slightly around the halfway mark, you might, with a bit of luck, hit the spot on the map where, a century ago, in a state of riotous abandon, Slobodan Kirpin planted a wooden flagpole in the sod and tied to it a rudimentary cotton windsock. In itself, this was an unremarkable act. It was, after all, a century for windsocks, for hailstone detectors, thunderbolt spindles, crampons tarry and lit, and wheeled enormities. What once had been a barren tract overgrown with knots of furze, bracken and scrog was now the stamping ground of a rum collection of fanatical experimenters, each with a vision of incandescent truth. Why this mob of boffins had chosen so unpromising a site for the blooming of their delusions is far from clear, although the proximity of Hoon's purple hills with their legendary aura may well be pertinent. Whatever the reason might be, each of these palatially trousered half-wits had arrived independently at this place of downpour and desuetude, scouring the landscape for the opportunities to test their madcap theories. On a stroll across the land, the innocent observer would be beset by visions both arcane and incomprehensible. A mound of boulders, dyed brilliant mauve, surrounded by wisps of gossamer nailed to charred twigs and branches, the whole topped by a shallow basin into which would be dripped minute quantities of medicinal liquids and gooey ointments. Passing a half-mile further on, our traveller would find, rising ferociously from the ground as if the very mud had spawned it, an impossibly intricate contraption of levers, winches, spigots, pulleys and other gubbins designed to uproot the tiniest specks of foliage and send them hurtling through the air into a massive pit, the walls of which were lined with battered gold plate on which had been engraved selected verses from Leviticus. Another half-mile, and our baffled rambler would be forced to negotiate a series of shallow trenches, dug according to a preordained scheme of mad complexity, each one having implanted in it a lozenge of gauze smeared with a foul unguent paste capable of conducting electricity, the whole system of trenches and lozenges transforming the area into a gigantic electric battery, powering an engine hidden inside a ramshackle hut at the battery's core, the purpose of which would presumably become apparent when its inventor deigned to unleash its demonic power. Surrounded by these fearsome contraptions, Kirpin's cotton windsock, raised proudly aloft, appeared as little more than a sign of its creator's poverty of spirit. Yet truth sat, hunched and fretting, just over the horizon. Can we doubt that Kirpin was well aware of the ramifications of his simple deed? Yes, we can. We must. That was chapter 1 of House of Turps, which was published by the Malice Aforethought Press, a sort of Hooting Yard forerunner, in 1989, the year the Berlin Wall came down. And here's chapter 2. His wen was hidden by a poultice of his own recipe. For years he had been preoccupied with the task of creating a universal poultice applicable to all wens, boils, sores, cysts, furuncles and blebs. The standard mustard plaster was to him a wretched thing, and he was determined to improve upon it. In his late teens, while apprenticed to a rust-scraping factory, he became obsessed with a future vision of apothecary shelves groaning under the weight of jar upon jar of his magnificent invention, Kirpin's improved curative bandage paste. During the long tormented hours he spent in the factory cellar scraping at patches of rust with a variety of huge utensils, these dreams came crowding into his head until there was room for little else. In his leisure hours he brewed up numberless potfuls of disgusting concoctions. The early recipes were undistinguished, although the germ of Kirpin's later genius was present. He sought out rare and unlikely ingredients, refining, until there was hardly any matter, vegetable or mineral, to be found in the village of Ack, a sample of which had not been boiled to a paste in Kirpin's huge iron pot. Yet he was dissatisfied. 2 decades had passed since first this mania had beset him, but all he had to show for it was a mountain of pails filled with the discarded results of over 10,000 experiments. Despite warnings of ruin and doom from his family, Kirpin left the employ of the rust-scraping factory and, with his meagre savings, enrolled for a chemistry course at the University of Ick. In retrospect, we must be thankful that he ignored the frenzied bewailings of his kinfolk, for it was at Ick that the Kirpin of history was born. Kirpin proved to be the most brilliant student the university had ever taught. Day and night he toiled at his studies. Several pages of scientific gibberish and mumbo-jumbo have been excised from the manuscript. They provide a comprehensive outline of Kirpin's studies. Listeners avid for the precise details would be well advised to consult any standard chemistry textbook of the period. And was awarded his final degree at the age of 53. As was the custom at Ick, he squatted on his haunches atop a podium hewn from basalt. Flags and pennants were dangled about his head, and from time to time, Flags and pennants were dangled about his head, and from time to time, after a verbal prod from the prelector, Kirpin would catch one of the pennants in his teeth and gnash at it with gumption. The roll of honour was then read, and one by one the graduates drew themselves upright, leapt down from their podia, and prostrated themselves before the vice-praelector in abundance, who lashed the certificates of conferment to their bodies with frayed ribbons. Slobodan Kirpin, the man who had entered Ick dismal and jaundiced, was now a doctor of chemistry. He had had half his teeth extracted 2 years before. At first the doctorate seemed to be a curse. So indefatigable was Kirpin in his search for an omnipotent poultice that the years of study, the widened intellectual horizons, had done nothing to divert him from his chosen course. On the contrary, his mania had intensified. But where before he would have been content to muck about with orris root and bee borage, now he sought to synthesize ever more preposterous substances. Weird, rare things not easily found in his usual haunts. Seeking finance from anyone who would listen, Kirpin set out on a mad odyssey. In his rucksack he carried retorts, Bunsen burners, test tubes, rebs, alembics and hellebore cramps. He strode across opulent landscapes, hardly aware where he was going. Every so often, some thrilling blob would cause him to halt, unpack his rucksack, and carry out a variety of ludicrous experiments. It was a harsh existence, and racked as he was by hunger and exhaustion, Kirpin became a physical wreck. He found solace, however, in the fact that his piteous frame erupted in enough sores, wens and blebs to make him his own best guinea pig. All the while he filled countless notebooks with the details of his experiments, ticking off different substances as he wrenched the curative properties out of them. Devil's starch, quake jelly, Tasmanian goo, spent bales, frad. And then he was beckoned by the Arctic. House of Turps, Chapter 3. In his diary, Kirpin gave the following account of his first weeks in the Arctic. At Stavanger, I came upon a man who sold me a curious garment, which he claimed would protect me from the icy cold. It appeared to be made out of wood, although I cannot be certain. There was a springiness about it, which is alien to most, if not all, of the wood I have come across in my time. It also appeared to be rather thin for a piece of protective clothing. I handed my rucksack to this rum fellow, who seemed to spit whenever he spoke, and not only spit, mind you, but let fly a gobbet directly at my tremendous hairstyle. I digress. Handing my rucksack to him, as I say, I clambered into this wooden overall. He demonstrated to me He demonstrated to me how to wedge my knees in the cramped, jointed sections of the legs, and similarly how to adjust the purchase in the arms by twiddling a small metal flange located at either elbow. The hood came separately from the rest of the outfit and was fixed in place by a devilishly complicated mechanism which locked and jammed as soon as I had donned it. I have yet to discover how to dislodge it. Lurching to one side to espy my Norwegian friend through the narrow slit provided for vision, I took my rucksack back from him and rummaged through one of the pockets for money. I was dismayed to note that I had only just enough cash left to buy this suit and to pay a jolly Jack Tar to provide my passage northward. However, there was no time to waste. Pressing some grubby coins into the man's hand, I bade him farewell and, wheeling myself about turn, causing my skeleton no little agony, I set off for the docks. Before I had gone 10 paces, I realised that it would be easier to carry my rucksack if I merely nailed it to my suit, chest level on my left side. Once again I wheeled about and headed for the smithy's shed I had noticed earlier. I would surely find a hammer and nails there. To my surprise, the man who looked up at me from his anvil was an old colleague of mine from Ick. We had studied latent phosphorescence together and burned daubs of clay. He did not recognise me, encased as I was in wood. I blurted out a greeting to which he did not react. I had not realised that my suit was heavily soundproofed and that if I wished to make myself heard, I had to screech at the top of my voice. An old man's lungs are not designed for such exertion, and I have had much need of soothing linctus in the weeks since I donned this apparel. But as I say, I did not realise immediately that my wooden cocoon was loath to emit sound, and I'm afraid that I interpreted my erstwhile colleague's bewilderment as evidence of cretinisation. Impatient to be away, I helped myself to a hammer and some nails and rammed the rucksack home, rather too energetically as it happened, since I managed to inflict a lesion in the flesh of my left upper torso, which still gives me some jip as I write. When I have worked out how to extricate myself from this warming wooden affair, I must apply some experimental poultices. 10 hours later I arrived at the docks and met Enrico. Over the last few months I have come to know him as well as I have ever known any of my fellow creatures. In another age, perhaps, they would have made a saint of him. He seems to be imbued with the sort of innocent goodness one associates with congenital idiots, and yet he has a first-class intellect. He has a ready command of 16 languages, 11 of which I find utterly incomprehensible. Some of them seem to consist mostly of coughs, groans, and a kind of strangulated choking, which, though unattractive, is enough to wake the dead, and has saved my bacon on more than one occasion, ringing out ghastly warnings at the approach of nameless terrors in the darkness, which otherwise would have fallen upon me and torn out my throat, or some such macabre business, or so Enrico tells me, at any rate. Splendid fellow! In this I-see-nothing world he has become my ears and eyes, my voice, my guide and helping hand. Were it not for him, I do not know how I would cope in this God-forsaken place. In the evenings we sit hunched over the campfires, which Enrico sets with such elegance from the most unpromising materials. Never in all my years have I met another man able to transform a handful of slush into a raging inferno in under a minute. So naturally does this ability come to him that he greets my astonished inquiries with a sort of superior disdain. We have had many interesting chats sat around the fire, Enrico belching and drooling in 4 or 5 languages simultaneously. I have learned to await the most pertinent points in his discourse, to interject with a barrage of ferocious shouting. If I spoke any lower, my friend would not hear a word I said from inside my wooden world, and although my throat is red raw from the effort, I do not wish to deprive Enrico of the benefits of convivial discussion and debate. We have ranged over all sorts of subjects, and though I fear at times that Enrico is something of a cynic, he has a plentiful store of anecdotes which are both entertaining and instructive. I realise now how little I knew of life in a Norwegian dockyard. House of Turps, Chapter 4. It was not until he reached that barren stretch of ice known as Van Glub's Land that Kirpin realised he was alone. All along, Enrico had been a figment spawned by his feverish brain. It is a testament to his implacability that once this vile truth had dawned on him, he was undaunted and trudged ever northward with renewed energy. A knothole in the right leg of his garb caused a small patch of frostbite to waylay his ankle, but this only increased his sense of urgency. He had developed an intricate method of applying test poultices to his wood-encased body by feeding them in through the mouth slit and then shimmying and wiggling in a precisely coordinated manner until the poultice reached the required area. Thus sandwiched between his flesh and the wood, the poultice could be gently tamped into place in order to pack snugly against his skin. Extricating the test pieces was another matter, and the dreadful difficulty of doing so led Kirpin to invent an evaporating poultice by harnessing the illegible properties of some vermilion crystals he had discovered wedged in a crevasse. One day, while bent over his crucible mucking about with shards of todge, Kirpin was astonished to hear footsteps behind him. Spinning around as fast as his garb would allow, he was confronted by an enormous creature, almost twice his height, burbling incomprehensible noises, which sounded at once like the tinkling of glass and the hooting of a foghorn. It had appeared as if from nowhere. His brain pulsating, Kirpin wondered momentarily if this preposterous being was yet another product of his febrile imagining, another Enrico. And yet, as it continued to burble, tinkling, hooting, the truth of its corporeality became evident. Adjusting his elbow flange, Kirpin held out his hand in greeting. The beast was silent for a moment, then twirled wisps of cold blue fragrance around Kirpin's bright body. Beckoning him to follow, it turned on what could only roughly be called its heel and waddled away. Hastily shoving his crucible and todge shards into the rucksack, Kirpin set off in pursuit. The creature stayed well ahead of him, but once he had hit his stride, Kirpin was able to make a rudimentary study of its main features. It was a sort of cross between a penguin, an ape, and a trout, huge, matted with rough fur, its head and neck covered in silvery scales and strange black ringlets. One arm tapered to a fin or flap, while the other was thick and hairy and ended in an almost humanoid hand. And as it waddled onward, its massive bushy tail thumped along the ground behind it, sending up flurries of thin snow, which, settling, covered its tracks. It was the most asymmetrical beast Kirpin had ever seen, and yet he was aware of a tremendous feeling of kinship with it. After all, it was the first life form he had come upon in 18 lonely months in the Arctic, and its presence overwhelmed him. He scurried after it with almost slavish eagerness. 2 weeks later, having trekked across the featureless expanse, the beast with its human acolyte in tow arrived at a gaping pit. Turning to face Kirpin, the ludicrous creature tinkled and hooted, then suddenly hurled itself over the edge into this icy maw. The great chemist had no idea how to react. Peering over the rim, he could see nothing at all, nor did any sounds issue forth from below. The compass nailed to his wrist was broken, so he was unable to ascertain whether or not he had reached the pole. Once again alone in the vastness, Kirpin hummed his favourite hymn. Then, with a certainty born of dementia, he threw himself after the beast into the pit. As he plummeted, his very being was invaded by bip and frummage. Then he lost consciousness. So that was half of House of Turps, chapters 1 to 4, and I will read chapters 5 to 8 to you next week. The back cover of House of Turps says, the long-awaited first volume in Frank Key's important 26-part history of the House of Turps. In this introductory work, Key outlines the bilge and the bindweed, the dust and the dribble, the whelk and the drudge. The true founder of the House of Turps is here revealed for the first time, vile and crumpled and stinking of ragwort, not unlike the author himself. Do not hurl this book over a precipice. It's not a book, of course, it's a booklet or a pamphlet, a spineless pamphlet. Published, as I say, in 1989, long ago. And it was in an edition of 200 copies. So if you've got one, you're a lucky person. Oh, and there's an epigraph at the beginning, which... very important to me. I read it around the late 80s, and it informed me ever since. It's from Dallas Weeb, whoever he may be, American short story writer. Anyway, in one of his stories, he says, when you have nothing to say, you write prose. And that was a great insight for me, to realise that I have nothing to say, so I should write prose. And I've been writing prose more or less ever since. But this is early prose, not quite suitable for reading on the radio. I think it would be very, very different were I to write it today. But of historical interest, I think. 27 years old. Is that right? Yes, 27 years old. So that's actually it for this week. I'll be back next week with part 2 of House of Turps. Bye-bye.
Life's like that, isn't it? Only the other day I was walking in the West End and suddenly I was set upon by hordes of fans and admirers who wanted to touch my clothes. So I took sanctuary in a nearby cinema. Normally, of course, I don't go in, but that day I saw something that really moved me. I'd like to share this wonderful experience with you. It was the sound of music.
You're listening to Resonance 104.4 FM, London's premier radio art station.
Πιστεύω στο Resonance FM γιατί με διασκεδάζει, με ενημερώνει, με εκπλήσει, με ενοχλεί, με προκαλεί και με εμπνέει. Εσύ γιατί πιστεύεις στο Resonance FM? Για περισσότερες πληροφορίες επισκέψτε τη σελίδα μας στο ίντερνετ www.resonancefm.com. Resonance FM 104.4. Ραδιόφωνο με φαντασία.
This is Resonance FM, streaming at resonancefm.com. Follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/ResonanceFM or join our group on Facebook.